Hi, I'm John Muir, and I'd like to welcome you to the Nature Journal Club. Every month at this time, we have a different workshop here on some aspect of nature journaling. And is for any of you your first time with us, and first time, so welcome. And this is actually a very good workshop to start with, because in this workshop, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be taking a look at a few ideas that I think are really high percentage tricks and ideas just to improve your nature journaling and also to make the whole process just a lot more fun. And I forgot my clicker. What we're going to be doing is at the start, I'm going to be walking you through a journal page. Oh, come on in. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad you could be with us. I'm going to walk you through me making a journal page and putting some things on it that it's going to be a combination of some tricks that can help you with drawing, and then some tricks that will help you kind of in a larger context in thinking about like what I'm going to do with my nature journal page. And then we're going to get into sort of hiding behind that. So up front, there's going to be some drawing tricks. But that's actually not the really most important thing out of this class. Today's class, I'm going to show you what I think is the secret sauce behind a really successful nature journal page. And so this, when you really start to kind of get into it and adopt it, you'll find that the process of journaling becomes a lot more fun and a lot more interesting. And I think you're going to have a really good time with it. So we're going to start, though, with a few ideas of, I'm going to show you some thoughts that I have about drawing pictures. And because that, I find, is a major element in, elephant, did I say? It's a major elephant in a lot of journal pages, and a lot of people have questions about that. And then we'll kind of start to build out from there and make the process of journaling much more interesting. Because if it's just a bunch of pictures in a book, it's kind of a sketchbook, but it can be so much more than that. So that's our plan today. We want to level up everybody's nature journaling practice. This, again, is going to make it more fun, more exciting, and I think you'll find that you're able to get things happening on your journal page that are much more dynamic and interesting for you. So let's start with kind of looking at my approach to making a sketch in a sketchbook. Our human brains have a really narrow bandwidth. We are not able to handle too many things at the same time. And if we try to do that, for instance, driving and talking on the phone, it's not that that's dangerous because you've got something in your hand. It's actually dangerous because doing each of those takes more than 50% of your brain power. So when you do them together, your brain is maxed out, and it's going to start to do both of those things not as well. And one of those things is operating a moving vehicle at 55 miles an hour or faster, right? And so when I'm drawing, if I try to make a sketch and I'm placing, like this is my sort of the start of a daffodil sketch. If I'm placing like where the tube is, where the sort of saucer of the platform of the petals and sepals is, where those different parts are, and I'm working at the same time, and my brain is thinking I'm going to draw this part with a little kind of curly line, it gets a little bit thicker here. I'm thinking about all those things at the same time. It's not going to work out well for me because my brain actually can't handle that much information at the same time. So what I do is I compartmentalize it into a couple of steps. I first block out the basic shapes, and then on top of that, I start to add more details. So you've probably heard in a lot of classes people talking about start your drawing with a light line, start lightly. If you're drawing in pen, though, you can't do this. And similarly, if you are, for a lot of us, once we start drawing, it's really easy for our pencils to start to press hard. And when that happens, come on in. When that happens, once you press hard, your brain goes, oh, that must be the right line because I pushed hard. Your brain's not going to want to erase the sort of deliberate lines that you make. So I find that a really, really powerful way to start any drawing is with a very, very pale non-photo blue pencil. So whether you're working in pen, I saw you had a little Pigma Micron out, if you like sketching in pen, you'll be able to do this with this. And, or with pencil, or whatever my media. I first start with this kind of ghost drawing to block in my basic shape with the non-photo blue pencil. And not all non-photo blue pencils work to do this. Some pencils make a very bold light blue line. But there's one brand of pencil that makes these really ghosty, super pale lines that are fantastic for blocking in any drawing. And it's the Prismacolor Kohl Erase non-photo blue pencil. So if you are friends at home looking at this, it has this little blue band that is around the edge of the ferrule there. And that's the one you want. And it's not going to help you guys, but for all you folks here, if you don't have one of these, raise your hand, because you now get, you get a pencil, and you get a pencil, and you get a pencil. Right? Everybody take a pencil. You get to pass these back. Everybody gets a non-photo blue pencil. You get to keep this. And you may find that this is just a game changer in how you... we need one more in the back there? And three more. Well, fortunately, I have a lot more. Great, here you go. Let's make sure that everybody who wants one gets one. So this is, whether I'm doing a landscape or a flower, or a bird, a bug, I start with this pencil, I block it in lightly, get my basic shape. It's really easy to kind of change your mind with this and kind of like, oh, I need this kind of out a little bit bigger. So there you go, that's how I start my drawing. I'll show you a little bit more about what I might do if I was drawing a daffodil here. On this little platform there are 6 petals, or petals, sepals, petal-like objects. And so I've just put little lines across it to help me place my petals. And then in doing this, lines like this could be either the tip of an individual petal, or if I wanted to, I could have in each one of those spaces there's going to be a different petal. Another thing that I'll often do when I'm blocking things in, a really useful drawing trick, is what artists call looking at the negative shapes. The idea of negative shapes is these are the shapes where you're not looking at the petal itself. You're looking at the shape of the air between 2 adjacent petals. And sometimes if you focus on that, you can kind of block things in a little bit more easily. So in blocking in the locations of these petals and sepals in here, I'm looking at the shape of the air, which I've kind of tinted blue here. I don't actually tint it blue, but this is what I'm looking at in order to kind of get this edge. So here, this sort of wedge here is symmetrical. This one is symmetrical but small. This one is small but asymmetrical. So looking at these sorts of things, looking at what is the shape between this petal and this petal, that actually helps me be able to draw in the lines that are going to be the shape of my flower. So with this non-photo blue pencil, I'm blocking in my basic shape. And once I like that, I put the blue pencil down and I start to draw more details on top of that. And so this next step is going to be a big jump. In future classes, we'll kind of work our way around sort of drawing every little line. But here I'm going to be, in this workshop, hitting what I think are just a few really useful big ideas in sketching. So my big idea now, I start with my non-photo blue pencil. I then am drawing directly on top of that. And so I know that my petal goes here. Then because that's my non-photo blue pencil, then I can work over that and kind of going, it's rounding, ooh, there's a little bump. Okay, then it's rounding again. My brain has a hard time doing that and getting that petal in the right place at the same time. So separate those into 2 separate stages. So I put my lines in. Something that we find is that on a drawing, if the lines are the same width all the way across the picture, it makes for a picture that's often less interesting and less dynamic. So just having a little bit of what we call line variation makes any drawing that you do more interesting to look at. So one way of handling that, some people can do it on the fly as their pencil is kind of coming around. They'll be drawing bigger, thicker lines, and then thinner lines, and then thicker lines. So they can actually do line variation as they're drawing. If that, and initially that's kind of difficult, another strategy is to draw your plant in and then come over it and say, I'm going to now add a little bit of line variation. And specifically as you do that, look for places where there are two objects where one is on top of the other. The edge of the object that is closer to you, you're going to hit with a little bit of a thicker line. Just sort of imagine a telephone pole that is closer to you, you see it as being thicker. One that is further away, you see it as being thinner. So the closer object, if it's a thicker line, your brain will kind of like, oh, that's a little bit closer. So places like here where this edge comes down, these are same width lines. If I come along here and I just sort of lightly kind of, oops, it's hard to, here we go. And I strengthen that right through there. It's a little bit of a more kind of punched in line. That part of the line, the drawing will pop forward more in front of other things. If I want this to be in front, I might kind of strengthen a little bit of that line. Sort of, my line will kind of start lightly bolder and then lightly again, so you can kind of fade into those things. That will help your drawing kind of have a little bit more of a sense of 3 dimensions. So a little bit of a heavier line in a place where things are overlapping. A heavier line here. I want the throat of this thing to kind of pop out in front of that, in front of the rest of it. Detail is something in a drawing that makes parts of the drawing also feel closer to you. So part of a drawing where you add in a lot of detail will feel that it's kind of coming forward in the drawing. If you put detail all the way through a drawing, it will flatten your drawing out. So in this part of this tube, the part that's close to me here, I'm going to add a little bit more detail right in here. Kind of where you've got this kind of crinkly edge pointing towards me. So a bunch of little detail right there in that edge pulls that edge towards you. That means this side is feeling a little bit further away. That's another very useful drawing trick. So strategically placing detail where you want either a focus of attention or to show that something is closer to you. From there, I'm going to add in some other details of the flower. This flower has some stamens inside the tube here. It has a little stem coming out here. If I put these new elements in with really big, powerful lines, they will feel like they're popping forward in the drawing, and I want them to set back. So I'm going to use, again, lighter lines. If I had come along on these things and popped these in with very bold lines, they then start to feel like they're little chips sitting on top of this edge here, as opposed to being stamens back inside the throat of the flower. So again, this idea of line width really helps you kind of place things in your journal. A little bit more detail, some of the little grooves and ridges on the petals themselves help show that as a flat plane. But also notice that I've got more detail on these ones than this one back here. Why is that? They're closer. So the closer ones just get a little bit more love. Further ones, not so much. And that helps people see depth in the flat piece of paper where there is no real depth. You're creating the illusion that there's depth there by using these tricks. A little bit of value also goes a long way. So value, the difference between dark and light. I have a surface of this flower here. There's another surface coming down on the side here. Imagine it like a box. So I've got shadow on this side, none here. That helps the viewer then see that as this rounding throat. Another thing that helps you kind of get a sense that this is a rounding throat is a little bit of shadow getting kind of darker as you go up down into this throat and then stopping abruptly at this bright white upper surface. Another thing to note about this drawing here is this cast shadow right in here. What that does is suggest that there's real light shining down on that, and it's kind of putting a little shadow across that area. That can also be a very helpful thing for when people look at this to start to see it as this three-dimensional form. So if the object that you're looking at has cast shadows across it, really pay attention to those. Those will do a lot to help you get the sense of volume and depth in whatever it is that you're looking at. So those are the techniques that I used to draw this. Kind of, if I put bullet points by them, so if you're keeping notes, kind of put a star by the ideas. We started with the non-photo blue pencil, got the basic shape. We then drew our lines on top of that, and then we popped in a few of those lines, giving us line variation. So the line variation really, really, really helps a lot. We put in detail on parts that were closer to us, and not in parts that were further away. And last, we're using the shadows in ways to really help sculpt and show the form of what we're looking at. So I have this upper flat surface white, side gray, throat dark, cast shadow. The shadows really help, the artists call it turn the form. And that means that I've got a plane that's coming like this, that plane turns. I want to show where I turn the form, and your shadows will really help turn the form for you. That's how I did it on that flower. Here's that same process got me this one here. So you could stop here if you're making a portrait of a flower. But in nature journaling, things get a lot more interesting. Because here you're thinking, this is just a portrait of something. And what nature journaling is about is looking at something and thinking. You want to engage your brain in really interesting and dynamic ways. And so you could stop here with this, and there's nothing wrong with making a drawing of a flower. That's great. But for me, this is the point where, like, okay, there's a drawing. I'm going to now use that as kind of a platform for starting to think in more interesting ways. So one way I do this is I look in this flower and I say, like, is there something really interesting about this flower? There's something that's interesting to me, but I really don't show that here. So yeah, those little stamen inside, I've got a few little chips. What if I take one of those and I enlarge part of something that is interesting to me? All right? So you can find what is interesting to you and kind of pull that out. By drawing this little circle and line in there, I'm showing how this idea relates to that. Other things that you can do is you can also start to kind of think like an engineer or think like an architect. There, here's a little bit of that with this view and then the side view of the same flower. But something that engineers and architects will also often do is they will say, well, what does this look like if I look at it from a different angle? And they do what's called a cross-section. So if you have a little penknife with you, you can make a little slit in this. So here from A and A prime. Here, over here on this part of my drawing, this is a cross-section view of what it looks to look at the end of this. So I can show that the relationship between this sketch and this drawing here by having these little lines here and then showing that that's the cross-section right through that spot right there. So different views of things, different sizes where you're going to zoom in, zoom out, making sections or cross-sections, really interesting. If this were, say, a live animal, I wouldn't chop the animal in half because it wouldn't like that. But what I might do is show that this part of the body, it's a cross section like that. You can have just sort of cross sections that show a shape across something if that doesn't really pop out very clearly in your drawing. So that's another useful way to go. I saw a cool sketch in my friend Akshay's sketchbook. We'll see some of his sketchbook pages in a moment, where he was looking at this leopard dangling over a branch. And he had this cross section that was like this. He had a branch, and then he had this little kind of leopard thing sort of showing how it sort of lay on top of the branch with its legs hanging down. I mean, what a neat way to sort of show that bit of information. So that's just adding to your repertoire the idea of a cross section. But there are other things that you're going to notice that are hard to draw. Like, if, let's say you're trying to draw a leaf and it's covered with fuzzy white hair. So if you try to draw a leaf and it's covered with fuzzy white hair, leaf, right, fuzzy white hair, the minute you start adding more fuzzy white hair, you're turning your leaf black, right? And so now you get this sort of graphite-covered mass, and that's supposed to be leaf with fuzzy hair. This little piece on this daffodil is supposed to be very almost transparent, paper thin membrane. And that doesn't really come across in my drawing. You know, how do you draw, like if I start drawing this as transparent, paper thin membrane, that's hard to draw. So what can you do? Question.
You can write about it.
Yeah, you can write. This is a papery, transparent little membrane. So if you use words in addition to your sketches, your ability to document stuff in your journal just went boom. So much more information using words and pictures together. Or if you want to bring emphasis to something, you can kind of emphasize that. You can show it in the picture and draw attention to it with words. Another thing that's really helpful about this is everybody's here has had the experience, you're partway into a drawing and this little kind of gremlin appears on your shoulders going like, this does not look like a daffodil. This is an unhappy daffodil. I do not like a daffodil. Right? And you start getting all over your case about this is not daffodil pretty. Right? So here's the workaround for that. The minute that starts happening, kind of go, all right. Pale yellow, papery. You start writing all over your picture and your brain goes like, oh, it's a diagram. I get it. This isn't a drawing, it's a diagram. Change the way you think about it from drawing into diagram and all of that pressure goes away. If it's just a little bit of thing, you think just a couple little notes in there, crinkled wavy edge, right? You just write a little bit on your drawings and so much of that capital A, I gotta make a pretty picture, art pressure, disappears. So start writing all over it and you'll be able to record more stuff, your pressure goes away. Another thing that is very helpful to record information about what you see are numbers. So inside here there are 6 stamens. Let's see, I count 1, 2, 3, 4 show up in my drawing. So I write 6 stamens. And you've recorded information. Inside this ovary here, there are 25 seeds. So I write 25 seeds. So things that you can count. Things that you can measure. Things that you can estimate them. Things that you can time those. So start adding numbers into your journal. And what you'll find is that those numbers will often reveal patterns to you that you otherwise would not have seen. A lot of people have a very negative relationship with math because we were taught math in a really yucky way, just as calculation, instead of thinking and seeing patterns around us. So in your own journal, start to look for those numbers and bring those in, and you can redevelop a positive relationship with numbers. Here also I'm showing that this is 1 centimeter in this drawing here. So this stamen thing here is about 3 centimeters long. This is 1 centimeter here. So I'm showing scale. This is about 1 centimeter on this drawing. So doing that allows me to words, pictures, and numbers. That's the formula. Right. Another very powerful thing to do, and we'll be talking a lot about this, is, here's for color. So you can color things in, either just straight with your colored pencils on it. This is also kind of a fun, quick shorthand when you are out of time, or if you initially have a set of colored pencils and they feel intimidating to you. Because sometimes you've drawn a picture and then you add the color to it and you wish, I didn't do that. Right? Another way of handling that is just to make a few little boxes and say that this part's bright yellow, but this part's kind of creamy yellow. This part's lemon green. Or you could write words, lemon green. So even if you don't have colors with you, it's a really great trick for colorizing your sketch. But another thing is to start to write your questions also all over the page. So we'll be talking a little bit more about questions and curiosity in a moment, but this ends up being a really big deal. If you can get your brain engaging with a little mystery in front of you and kind of going, what's up with that? The whole process will become a lot more fun. So curiosity itself is fun. Curiosity is an experience that you get that actually comes along with a slosh of dopamine. Your brain gets dopamine when you're curious. So that little kind of lean in feeling, that's like, ooh, dopamine, right? And in that state, with that neurotransmitter sloshing around in your brain, your learning is dramatically improved, as well as your memory and your ability to focus your attention. What's not to like? Nothing. So get yourself curious. Start to ask questions. Write those questions down on your paper. We'll look at kind of what to do with them in a moment. So here I'm wondering about, so this tube that sticks out, I know that these are petals and sepals back here, but what structural part of the flower makes this tube? I don't know. So I write that in. Then how does having a tube like this affect pollinators who might come to this? I'd imagine a big monarch coming to this and kind of going like, what do I do with this big tube? Right? Bumblebee, no problem. But how does that affect those pollinators? Any question you have, start to write those on your page as well. And what that does is really kind of, your brain will engage with those questions more. And also, you'll be able to remember your questions more. Later on, you might come across a partial answer or an answer to one of your questions. And you're like, oh, I had a question about that. But it just gives a little bit more special attention to the mysteries that are in front of you. And that will get your brain to kind of engage with those mysteries a little bit more. The final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put what I call my metadata on my page as well. So here, this is in Golden Gate Park, April 1st, 2019. The sky is partially cloudy. So that little piece of metadata takes this from kind of a drawing of a plant and turns it into data. So a photograph that you have that is just by itself, that's a photograph. A photograph that is date stamped and geo-referenced is data. So you can do the same with your journal. You can turn any page into data, where it's actually going to be later on a useful scientific document by just recording that metadata with what you have. So what I've got here is kind of a look at, I gave you some strategies that I use to help me draw. But these are strategies that I use that help me think. And that's where we really want to go today. We're going to be looking at other things we can do in our journal that help us, as we are observing things, kind of get more out of the experience of journaling by activating our brain even more. So let's start by thinking about what sorts of things we choose to put in our journals. Flowers are often kind of the entry drug for most people. They kind of are walking around, there's a flower, oh, I know what to do with this. I draw the flower in my journal. Right? So people are brand new to journaling, they'll hike through the field, they'll see a flower, they stop around, they cut, okay, I can get this. Right? And then with those people, you can kind of prompt them a little bit more, and they start using words, pictures, and numbers. That's great. So then, all the way through spring, they're sketching flowers, and then spring ends, and at least here in California, the hills dry up, no more flowers. Then what happens is people close their journals and wait till next spring to draw more flowers. Right? And so I've actually seen a number of journals that have a bunch of flowers from different years. But if you expand the range of things that kind of trigger your brain, like, oh, I could journal about this, there's cool stuff to do any time of the year. So think about your own journals. Other than flowers, what are things that kind of trigger you to kind of want to grab your journal and kind of get to work? So think on your sit there and think, as you think of one thing, put up a finger or another finger. So I want to see how, I see you got one thumb up, we've got two. If you come up with other possibilities. So what's one thing that regularly goes in your journal?
Things animals do.
Behaviors. So things animals do. She's looking for things that animals do. So notice that it's not just animals, but things that animals do. So that she sees some kind of critter and it's pumping its tail in a weird way. She's grabbing her journal then and kind of like, oh man, cool. Here's this little bird. It's doing this. And whatever behavior it is, that's a great trigger, right? Very often when people kind of get their trigger, then they start journaling. But what we're going to do is we're going to expand the range of possible triggers for all of us. So what's another thing that's kind of a trigger for you? Kind of gets you journaling. What?
Birds.
So any bird you find.
Any bird.
I mean, just like such colors, patterns. You see birds and you're like, I don't need a flower. And what's cool about that is that, yeah, they can move, But because they can fly, they'll often stick around and really let you have a good look at them. Mammals go and hide. And they don't sing, and they don't have pretty colors. Most of them. So yeah, birds, great subjects. And we've got some special workshops that are all about drawing birds. What are some other topics that kind of pop up for people?
Seascape.
What?
Ocean.
Oceans and seascapes. So, oceans, because we're used to, like, you go into a gallery, there will be seascapes and mountainscapes, right? And so what a lot of us do is that when we see the seascape, we're like, oh, I can draw a seascape. And then we see a mountainscape, and we're like, oh, I can draw a mountainscape. But there are all these other little landscapes around us, and we don't realize that those can be triggers also for us. So if seascapes trigger you, what you also want to start doing is looking for more subtle kind of moments of landscape that you can also record in your journal. I was visiting in Kansas, and people there's no ocean, there's no mountains. They still do landscapes. And they had this wonderful term that it was not a pejorative term, it was a term of affection. They called the landscape underwhelming. This underwhelming landscape, but it was said with love and a reverence. The idea that was kind of behind this idea of that they loved Kansas because it was underwhelming was that the idea is like, yeah, there's no big mountain here, but if you you look past that, you find these sort of subtler layers of beauty that otherwise you might not see because you were so distracted by that big mountain. And so find those little subtleties in other moments around you. This is a list of some possible sort of categories of things that you can also put in your journals. So any living things, including people, right? So we're part of nature too. So plants, animals, or birds, you see those. Or things, you find a cool rock, a cool piece of driftwood, some interesting object. You can put those in your journal. Kind of a neat trick that people often do when they do that, like they find a cool acorn, they'll draw a little acorn, right? And a little highlight on it, and then they'll just put a little faint shadow on the side of that, and then it looks like a little acorn is sitting there on their journal. Kind of, you look at people's journals like, wow, there's a feather, and then a little shadow kind of makes objects look like you're kind of collecting them right on top of your journal. So you can find found objects. Sometimes you're in a place that is interesting, and landscapes are a great way of recording places. Also, you can make a cross-section. You kind of go down here to the creek, and then it's flat there, and there was grass here, and I had these kind of trees here. A little diagram, and here's me doing my little happy dance because I'm out in nature. Just even if a landscape drawing feels overwhelming, you can often get in a little cross-section, which is a great way to kind of enter into playing with a place. Similarly, making maps. Here's my lake, and I've got forest around this side, and here's where the little cabin where we were staying is, and then there's the big meadow, right? Other ways of kind of interacting with place. Somebody already mentioned the behavior of the bird, the animal behavior. There you're getting into an event, something that has happened in front of you. I think of events and phenomena, like you see some cool thing, you go out and there is, has anybody seen a fog bow? A fog bow. Or how about when there's those weird rainbow spots on either side of the sun, right? You're out there, you see some phenomenon, and you're like, what's up with that? So you see some kind of...
What is a fog bow?
Aha! No spoilers here. Oh, but yes I can, and I will. That's right, there are such things as fog bows. There are fog bows, there are moon bows.
Really?
Oh yes, right? I mean, we live in this world that is filled with mysteries. But we tend to notice the things that we know are going to be there and kind of reassure ourselves by sort of seeing them again, like, oh, that's so nice, it's a rainbow, right? But we don't look closer at the rainbow to sort of see the phenomenon that we don't understand. So if I have a rainbow, for instance, I've got a rainbow here. Is the sky the same kind of darkness outside as inside? Many people don't know because they see the rainbow. They're like, oh, rainbow, I'm happy. But if you're kind of looking around the environment, especially for things that kind of, you're looking for things like, oh, that's weird. What's up with that? And all of a sudden you notice that inside the rainbow is a really different value than outside the rainbow. You've just found a phenomenon, and it's great to find things that you don't understand. And document and record any clues that you find in your journal. And I'm not going to tell you which one to start, which one to start. You have to wait for your next rainbow. Right? So this part here, these events and phenomena and interactions, this is really cool stuff. This is really cool stuff. We should add behavior into that. Right? And lastly, your own insights, your own thinking, your feelings about the place that you're in. You are also part of this picture. You're what's out there in nature. And you're doing all this intense focusing on what's out there. Take some time and turn that lens into your own heart. And let some of that come down on the page as well. Couple of things that we found when people start to also essentially journaling about themselves and let themselves in, is that people who keep a diary or a record of sort of their own thoughts about things are more emotionally intelligent than people who aren't. So it's just the practice of reflecting, that kind of self-reflection, makes us more reflective. The other thing that's really interesting is that if you pay attention to the moments around you that you find like really special, wonderful, and just kind of note that in this moment you kind of look for moments where you are grateful in some way to the world around you. That can be for the sound that the wind makes in the trees. And think about these sort of observations and what kind of warms a part of your heart, the way that light is coming through those ferns. There's a little moment of beauty. To be grateful for that and to put that moment of gratitude. Your sketch in the journal is a prayer of gratitude to the world around you. Those who pay attention to things in the world around them for which they're grateful end up being happier people. People think that happy people are grateful, but it's actually wrong. There's data that shows that it is grateful people that are happy. If you start to keep a gratitude journal just every day, before you go to bed, write down 3 things that you're grateful for. Or you're sitting around the table with family and you say, what are 3 things that you're grateful for today? And people sort of report those. When we intentionally do that, we find that people who are intentionally doing that, their level of reported happiness grows and grows and grows and grows. Because we're being aware of what we do have to be grateful for. And what a blessing it is to be here and be sentient and have this one little precious moment here on this planet. So let your journal be a place to record your own gratitude for the things that are around you. And you'll find that your journal actually helps you be happier. Dopamine and happiness, what could be better? It's all hiding in the pages of your journal. Right? But that's not even the secret sauce. Right? The secret sauce, the thing that seems to really, when you can get your journal to you really want to level up your journal, you want that one thing that's going to take it from here, oh, that's really fun, this is great, to oh yeah, this is game on. What it is, it's a state of mind, and that is curiosity. Curiosity, if you think about your feeling of curiosity, that lean in, so that is dopamine sloshing your brain. This neurotransmitter, again, it improves your learning, it makes you happy, it improves your focus and attention. And you can do that intentionally anytime you want. You don't have to wait for curiosity to come and hit you. Oh gosh, I've got a question about that. You can sit there and be looking at something and saying, what questions do I have about this? And you start to ask those questions, and then curiosity happens. You can't wait for curiosity to come to you, or you can I think I want some dopamine right now. I'm going to go stimulate some curiosity. Right? The way you do that, 2 very powerful ways of doing that. One is with these 2 sort of sets of prompts. The first is one that everybody knows, is that who, what, where, when, how, why thing. Right? Those questions that we learned about kind of basics of journalism. And what these are is each one of these kind of gets you to, you're looking at something and you start thinking about it in different ways. So for instance, if I'm looking at this picture here and I'm thinking about a when, right? So how long ago did this tree die? How long, I'm thinking about anything now, when is anything that relates to time, right? So how long has this tree been alive? There's just a little living portion here. At what point, how long ago was this a fully leafed out tree? How much longer will this tree survive? And then how long does it take this wood here to start to decompose at the high elevation here in the White Mountains where I'm seeing this? All of those are when questions, because they get your brain thinking about time. Think how differently your brain interacts with the same visual stimulus if you are thinking about a how question. So how things work, how in this dry environment, how do you get enough water to survive, right? How does the wind that howls across here in wintertime, how does that sort of affect your survival? There seem to be at one point branches coming out here. How did those make it when they're facing into the direction of the prevailing wind? You see how just changing the lens from when to how, the kinds of questions that your brain is going to be dancing with will be totally different things. And so too with the second set of questions here. These are very, very useful questions. I've got 5 ideas here that are absolute gold for getting your brain to kind of really grapple with neat stuff. So form is you're looking at something and you're saying, what is it like? What is the structure here? So if I were thinking about form-related things with this, I'm noticing this big kind of spiral in this tree. What is the amount of spiral? Is it the same on big branches as little branches? Is it the same direction on all the trees? Is it the same direction in one branch on all the limbs? Function is, how does it work? Causation is, why is it like that? What causes this spiral in this tree that I'm seeing? Change is getting your brain to, we have a bias towards thinking that things that we look at, what you see is what you get. What you see is all there is. And when you start thinking about change, it shakes your brain out of that very kind of narrow framing. You start thinking about change, you start thinking about, what was this like before? What will this be next? And it will bring your brain in a totally different direction. And the last one, connections, is you start thinking about things as systems. How is this connected to that? How is this affected by that? How is how does this, whatever you're looking at, affect other things? Each one of these will take your brain in really dramatically different directions. So what I recommend doing, because most people kind of have memorized the who, what, where, when, how, why. It's always at your fingertips. But form, function, causation, change, and connection, write that as a little list in the back of your journal. And every once in a while you can use that as kind of a prompt for getting your brain to sort of play with other ideas. So we're going to do a little experiment here. I'm going to put a slide up in just a moment. These slides, by the way, these nature slides, these are from the nature photographer Rob Hirsch. He's got a wonderful gallery just outside of Yosemite in Groveland. If you go through there, stop at Mountain Sage and check him out. Recently published a new book with a bunch of his photography. I love the stuff that he does. He's got a camera lens that kind of reflects the brain of a naturalist. So there's a lot of his photographs, there's interesting stories and things that you can think about inside of them. What I'd like you to do here, I'm going to put up one of his photographs, actually 2 of his photographs. Before we do, I want you, you with the people sitting around you, or actually divide you into teams. The 2 of you are a team, the 2 of you are a team. The 2 of you back there are a team, the 2 of you sitting next to each other, they're a team, and then the 2 of you You're another team. And so we want to get a little bit closer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a photograph here, and you will have picked as a team one of these as kind of an initial seed to kind of get your brain thinking in an interesting direction, a place where you might not go all the time. Looking at the photograph in front of you together, you're going to try to come up with as many questions as fast as you can about what we're seeing, like why that, blah, 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 blah. Most of these, because you might, let's say you started with your idea of connection. It's okay to ask questions that are not about connection, but see if you can kind of let that connection kind of prompt your brain to when you are intentionally bringing that in, you'll see that how questions that you otherwise would not ask will come up for you. And that's very interesting. Questions that you otherwise would not have asked yourself. So you're all going to be talking at the same time. And I know that a lot of people are kind of shy at first, so what we want to do is just kind of get over the fear of I'm going to be making noise, that will be weird. No, it's going to be okay. So I want everybody to just start going blah 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 blah. Blah 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 blah. You ready? All right, here we go. And go.
Yes, so I think it's such a straight. Is there something underneath different causing it? Yes. That's causing different trees to go different places, or to cause different trees to change at different, slightly different times, or are those all different trees?
I'm also looking at the
Is it just like there are different phases over time will they all change?
You mean the very
and
the
the
tree
See, it's a straight line. Is it geology that's killing the soil underneath it, or is it the light that's causing
Are
it?
those seasonal? And then the branches are up here, but then what caused the growth?
And stop. So, just notice, did anybody find that a prompt that you chose kind of tweaked your brain into kind of getting at some questions you otherwise might not have?
Yes.
All right. See, just for that reason alone, it's useful to do this kind of an exercise, because we tend to think about things kind of in our narrow, predictable, usual way. If we want to kind of seed our brain with creativity, strategies like this that just kind of get our brain doing something different is really, really, really powerful. You will come up with questions that otherwise there's no way you would touch them. So together, again, choose one other prompt. I'm about to put a different visual image in front of you. And remember, it's okay to ask questions that are not on with that prompt. Does each team have a kind of a subject? Right? Again, it's okay to kind of go off of that and give me some blah blahs. A blah blah blah, a blah blah blah, a blah 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 blah, a blah 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 blah, blah 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 blah, and boom.
So was it a lot of it? And it's water comes through and are we getting causation or
Oh, like there was something else there, because it could have been something else there, but then got kind of buried away in time, or it could have been something else. There was water like there
something
was
solid that
there was something solid, or there was something water, and then it got deposited.
some, a lot on it.
I think in any way, I think it was
They were just separate levels available.
we're going to call it
Whether it's like,
And stop.
so I was wondering,
All right. So this is a strategy that you can use with anytime you're observing things. You what it is intentionally. I'm going to go into what I'm looking at. I'm going to get some questions from it. All right. So you just sit there and just kind of say to yourself, all right, it's question time, and go, and stuff will come up for you. And what you'll find very often is that one of these questions may be like really interesting to you. Often it's not the first one that you ask. Right? If you just kind of wait for questions to come to you, often you just kind of get a few little questions. But if you're intentionally kind of digging on questions, like boom, 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 sometimes a question leads to a more richer question. You get the question behind the question. Interesting things happen. Right? So it's a very powerful way of just getting your brain to kind of have more questions. And write those down in your journal. And then the next step is, okay, so I've got questions, but what am I going to do about it? And that's where the sort of next set of tools comes in. The first thing is be willing to change your plan for the day. You know, can you, like, you kind of really get into something? You're thinking like, I should be on this hike, I should be like doing this. But what if you really kind of get into what is happening with the leaves on that tree there? You can spend the rest of the afternoon there, and it will be rich and productive. So give yourself the room to change your itinerary based on the whims of your curiosity, right? And you go out for a little walk, and you kind of get caught up in this mystery, and you're out there all day. Let yourself go there. A little bit of John Muir, right? Let yourself kind of get caught by that mystery and just go for it. Sometimes it helps to if you started looking at something where you kind of can't really finish it right now, but you're thinking, but what if I came back here first thing in the morning? Or what would this be like, in 3 weeks? You put it on your calendar. In 3 weeks, you kind of go back there, and you can then you can kind of on the same journal page, you can kind of interact with this sort of thing over time. Call that giving yourself a project. And you can, I'll give you an example of that in a slide in just a moment. But that will really kind of open up all sorts of possibilities. So you don't have to do it all right now. You might be able to get some clues right now. But the rest of the clues, you might need to be here at a different time of the day, a different season. But you kind of have these projects going in your head, where even if you're not able to go back to the right place, you're wondering, like, what do the buckeye tree, what happens, this structure on the buckeye tree, what happens when this happens? Then next spring you're walking around, you bump into a buckeye tree, you remember, like, oh, I've got this thing going on. And even it may be on a different page, but you're kind of tying into that, the seeds that were planted way back then when you started this project. As you do this, there's a tendency for us to get out our phones and Google it. Consider the possibility that sometimes an interesting wrong answer may be more useful for your brain and your experience than quickly getting the right answer. And on a lot of this stuff, you can, on your own, mess around with it and try to figure stuff out. And in doing this, you don't have to be right. Because what you can do is, as you're coming up, use what scientists call the language of uncertainty. As you start to come up with a possibility, write in your journal, like, could it be that? Or perhaps, or I wonder if. You use that uncertain language, and then let yourself come up with your own explanation for what you're seeing. Write and draw your explanation. And often when you get something on the page, you'll look at it, and you kind of go like, When it was in my head, it seemed like a really good idea. Now that I'm looking at it on paper, like this part here, not so much. That doesn't really make sense to me. And you might be able on your own to sort of figure out, maybe not. You ever started to say an idea out loud and partway through your sentence you kind of go like, oh, never mind, that's not a good idea, right? Ideas sound great in our heads, but get them out on paper. And it really helps you think about whatever you're doing. You don't need to be right. You don't need to go and then look things up. All that stuff, by the way, on Google or in encyclopedias came from somebody else just like you sitting on a stump and just looking hard for a while. Or sometimes coming back at another season. And letting yourself be present with some of those mysteries. It's a very good skill is to be able to be present with the unknown and a mystery. And let it kind of wash over to you and let you kind of interact with it. Instead of like, oh, I wonder about that. Can I get a quick answer for it? And then be on to the next thing. So it's sort of slow, it's like slow food for your brain. A mystery that you can untangle. And using that tentative language of science, you can let yourself kind of have the wiggle room to kind of not be right. And it's okay. The minute you say like, it's this way because, you've got a stake in the ground and your ego doesn't want to be wrong. But you say, could it be, perhaps, I wonder if, or here's a possible theory. The last little light, yes?
Sorry, I really appreciate your point, and because I mean we were hiking, and I wanted to know the name of this weed, you know, and I was just like racking my brain around it, and then you start to get away from your experience, right? But later on, you know, sometimes you do want to know exactly what it is that you're looking at, and sometimes you find some variety of tree or something. Do you know a way? Because you can like pour through books or the internet and not really. Do you know a way of or a good tool for actually identifying
Yes.
certain species?
Yes, and it actually is an online tool.
Mm-hmm.
There's an amazing system that's developed out of the Academy of Science. It's called iNaturalist. iNaturalist. So get yourself the iNaturalist app. And what it is you take a photograph of whatever it is that you've got a mystery about, and you send it in to them, and it's now date stamped and georeferenced, and thousands of other naturalists will be looking at your photograph, having a debate about what it is, and putting all that up there, and then they kind of decide on what it is, and they say, well, we think it's this, like, you know, a juvenile, you know, whatever it is. And the whole kind of, you know, debate and identification, and then you actually contributed to citizen science, because you are now, your photograph is part of a database saying that this thing is in this place at this time. Neato, totally neato. So iNaturalist, I love it. But do let yourself still be willing to kind of be present with the mystery. Yeah. So it's not that there's nothing bad about getting the answer, right? But I'm going to suggest this right? Sometimes just let him sit and be present with that. And the more that you can kind of be present with the unknown, you'll find that often that's where things get really fun. The last little thing I wanted to talk about is sort of being playful and irreverent. If we take ourselves really, really seriously when we're out there, sometimes it's not as much fun. And if you get a playful mindset towards whatever you're doing, your creativity will also be improved. You'll have kind of the wiggle room to kind of like, just kind of move a little bit more fluidly through your ideas. Let's take a look at what this process can look like on paper with also just a little bit of play. So this is the journals of, one of the journals of Amy Tan. You may know her as an author, but she is also a nature journaler. And the Backyard Chronicles are a book that she has in her house just of observations of the birds that are feeding her, and the squirrels and all the shenanigans that these things go through. Let's take a look at, open this book up and see some of the things that are going on. So this is size matters at the feeder, right? So she noticed that certain birds would displace other birds. And so the titmice would kick out the chickadees who had kicked out the nuthatches. And she kind of came up with the rules that all the birds follow when they get to her field. So think about this also in terms of playfulness. I mean, what a kind of fun way to look at it. Like, here are the rules, right? Rule number 1, the early hermit thrush gets the worm. 15 of them, to be precise. Other rules, like a mob of lesser goldfinches keep away other seed eaters, except the larger house finch. So we can scare all these other ones away, but this mob can, interesting ideas. The mourning dove dominates juvenile scrub jays, and adult scrub jays take over all the rest of the food. The last little one in here is, and I chase away scrub jays. I mean, what fun, right? So you can also see that little bit of playfulness kind of coming up there, like the list of rules for behavior at the feeder. You also could, think about this in terms of, interactions and sort of, dominance hierarchies and things, or it's the rules at your feeder. Which is more fun? Which would you want to do? Here's another book, just sort of also thinking about kind of just being playful with this. So here the theme of this is that the hermit thrush goes rogue. And she's got a quote here from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And it says, so she's also looked this up, and it says that on their website, it says hermit thrushes rarely visit backyards and generally do not visit feeders, right? And so this hermit thrush goes wrong. And then this one is here, I am a hermit thrush with an identity crisis, right? Because it's at the feeder, in her backyard. And this one's like, or am I a house finch? Right? I mean, that's fun. But she's also recording, significant biological information. Here's an example of a project. She's trying to figure out how many are in the junco clan. And so here's little diagrams of juncos. She has come up with her own color palette for colors regularly on juncos, and then placing those with numbers and colored pencils at different places on her birds. And so this would be a project that she's doing over time. She's looking at this one, then a different one shows up. Another day she might get this one, another day this, another day she'll fill this one and more. And so if you have a project, a new weird junco shows up in your feeder, you're on it immediately. Think of how having a project like this kind of going in the background would completely change your behavior and how you look at things happening on your bird feeder. Right? So those projects can alter and change our behavior in really fun and creative ways. Let's take a look at a few journal pages from a different journaler. All right? This fellow right here, this is Akshay. He is a member of the Nature Journal Club. He's an engineer and thinks in really interesting ways. He loves trying to find a mystery and figure it out. And I think he's a great example of the idea of, I don't need to be right. I'm not going to look it up on my phone. I am going to just investigate here and see what I can figure out by my own observations. And when he kind of gets into these states, he gets so super focused that he doesn't notice the rest of his family and friends kind of goofing off behind his back. He's in a flow state here, just total concentration. So they're kind of having a little bit of fun at his expense. That's why we love him. Let's take a look inside his journal and sort of see what's going on these pages. Right? So here he is down in Natural Bridges, looking at the swarms of monarch butterflies. And they're all on this diagonal sun-baked log. And he notices, and you can't read this at the back, so it says that this is not on a eucalyptus tree. He says, I thought that they were only found on eucalyptus trees. Right? So that's his first observation. But then he's looking at it some more, and he says, but wait a minute. The bark underneath these leaves here looks like eucalyptus bark. So now I'm not so sure. So what's interesting here is he's made an observation, and here he's disagreeing with himself. Right? So actually changing his mind. The process of journaling has got him sticking around looking long enough that he can make observations, then go to the next level and actually disagree with himself. And not being like, oh no, I made a mistake. But going like, oh, that's interesting. Now I'm not so sure. To be kind of epistemologically honest with yourself about like what you're experiencing when you're seeing things. To be able to do that takes a lot of sort of integrity, of appreciation and respect for your observations. So then he's thinking, then he says that so that the leaves that are on this, could these be from a climbing vine? And maybe this is a eucalyptus tree with leaves from a climbing vine. In which case, he says, then, why are these still being attracted here? He's wondering, is there something in the eucalyptus bark, not the leaves, that attracts monarchs to those trees? So you hear, just by going down this little kind of rabbit hole of thought, he now knows something more from his own direct observations, that these butterflies are also attracted to the eucalyptus trees, whether or not they have leaves on them. So what's going on with that? Isn't that interesting? So here's another kind of look into his brain. He's up in Yosemite. Here's Half Dome. I love that. Isn't that great? There's Half Dome. All right. And so a lot of people would stop here at the little sketch of it. But how did this have break? And here, over here, check this out. Possible theory. So again, he's using that language of uncertainty. This is him drawing and describing his one possible explanation of what could be going on here. And I love how it starts off with full dome. That's good. That's good. So he's got full dome, sort of cracks forming, water getting in there, ice pushing these things apart until this part falls off, right? He's not saying that this is the right answer, but this is a possible explanation for it. And so doing that really gets you, when you're in the moment out there looking across Yosemite Valley, to really be thinking in all of these interesting ways. It's also not saying this is what's going on. And the other interesting thing is that in his description, notice that there are these 3 stages. There's this crack you can see in here with arrows, force arrows pointing out. It says crack in there with kind of jaggedy script. So what he's doing is training himself to visually describe his ideas. And this, friends, is crazy important. Let me kind of underscore this. So here again, he's got ideas, and he's sort of showing you what is in his brain, also with pictures. And this is really important for several reasons. One, it's kind of fun to look at. But more importantly, what he's doing is he's training himself to be a visual thinker. The more he does this, the more he develops his brain to think with pictures and images. Have any of you ever been at a meeting where people they're discussing and kind of debating some sub-subject, and it's just kind of tying itself in knots, and everybody's kind of confused, and it's all kind of a jumble. And then there's somebody who's kind of quiet, and she's sort of sitting there for a while, and she goes, Well, she reaches out across the table, and she takes a little napkin, and she says, I sort of see it this way. Our project, it actually has, it is 3 major parts. These ones here are really kind of connected in this way. And it's this element out here that is the part that is really kind of giving, whatever it is, there's a little diagram that is made. And that this is now, there's a visual image. What had been a discussion, there's now a little visual image to go with it. And all of a sudden, that little image becomes what focuses the rest of the conversation. Has anybody seen one of those napkin moments happen? Right? Well, it turns out whoever controls the napkin controls the meeting. Being able to do this is an incredibly powerful communication or persuasion tool, or just a tool for your own thinking. The more that you practice this, the better and better you're going to get at visualizing ideas. It will change the way you think. It will give you incredible power to communicate, or when you need to persuade other people. If you're the person who can come up with the image, and you could have done that image in 30 different ways, but you chose the one that your image is now the one that's on the table because you're a visual thinker. So this trains you to be that kind of visual thinker. Incredibly, incredibly powerful. Let's take another little look at one of his journal pages. Aren't they fun? Right? So yeah, he came up with this kind of quick diagram where in Tanzania, and he was, he found that he was getting kind of wrapped around the axle about like having to make these drawings perfect. So he kind of came up with these kind of cubist diagrams that always got him, you know, the inside of the leg, the outside of the leg, the back, the tail, the ears, the inside, the inside of the ear, the outside of the ear. And so he would be able to go and then, you know, very quickly, like, be able to get all this crazy information. But also over here, he's watching the serval cat hunt. And what he's done is he's drawing the little serval cat over here, and then there's a dotted arrow that comes like this, which is the path of the serval cat's jump onto some prey item. So it was stalking along, got into this leany posture, a little bit of wiggle, and then it took off vertically and came down onto something. And his question is, what's up with this vertical jump? Because doing that, it takes a lot more, there's more hang time in the air than going straight at something. So what is the function of doing this? It's interesting, coyotes will do the same thing. You ever seen a coyote hunt in a field? And then down. So what is going on with that behavior? And here is his theory. You can't see it in the back, but this is a box that says theory. And he's drawn this little rodent here with little arrows coming out like this. This is the possible, what if this is the kind of field of view of that little rodent? And there's a blind spot above. So it is jumping up and falling through the kind of the sunroof in this little mammal's protection system. And so it says theory. He's not saying this is it, but this is, he's not just noticing something. He's then going, why? And then going the next step, here's a possible explanation for it. The more we do these things about, if we practice this with observations we make in nature, we can apply the same idea throughout all sorts of other problem-solving scenarios in our lives. So, I've got two other big thoughts on things to kind of supercharge your nature journaling. The second to last one is get your natural history on. All right? Today in the United States, kids are better at identifying Pokemon characters than the plants and animals that are live in the area right around their own homes. So people used to kind of know the difference between a beech and an elm, and it's no longer true. We're kind of ignorant of our kind of our local critters. So a good thing to do is to just kind of start to get to know the usual suspects. You know, can you regularly identify 10 local plants, 10 local animals? Can you do 10 local insects? Right? If so, give yourself a big pat on the back, right? But if not, what you want to do is start kind of, you'll find that if you know a little bit about a lot of things, you'll actually see more when you're out there. It kind of gives you like, you know, like, oh, this is one of these. Wait for it. Something eventually about, look at that, right? Knowing a little bit about these critters and who they are really helps you see a lot more when you're out there. The other thing that's really fun to do, so let's say you kind of get, you learn a little bit about birds, a little bit about mammals, a little bit about flowers, about the reptiles and amphibians, some insects, some trees, a little bit about local geology. As you're doing this, there's going to be something that kind of particularly sparks your interest. And in that area, go deep. You don't have to do it with everything, but in this area, kind of go deeper and see what richness comes from having a more sophisticated understanding of just that one group. What you learn with this actually ends up helping you understand a lot about all these other groups as well. But sometimes you then you realize that you could go down all this way with all these things. You've got just a better general feeling for the breadth of the cloth and the depth of the richness behind everything around you. One fun way to do that, if you are here in California, there's the California Naturalist program. If you want to invest some time in a course, so that's a cool thing to consider doing. But also just when it's mushroom season, you can go out on the local mushroom societies, have field trips in spring. You've got wildflower trips. We're here at an Audubon center. They regularly have bird watching field trips. They're experts in all these sorts of things who'd be delighted to help you kind of get your natural history on. And that makes being outside so much more interesting. Especially if you're approaching it like a naturalist, somebody who's nature journaling. Some people, when they kind of get to identify birds, once they can say like western scrub jay, they don't really look carefully at it. That's not really a problem with nature journalers. And you'll find that there's just so much more richness. And my last thought for you is to take this activity of nature journaling, dive into it, you'll see how it kind of enriches your life. But then to turn around and to share that with somebody else. Right? So that could be with a child in your life, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew. Perhaps even bringing this to a local school near you. Or if you're in a homeschool situation, to bringing this skill to your homeschool collective. Right? If there is a special elder in your life, elders, we tend to kind of shut them up and put them away. What if you bring your elder out with you on some nature journaling experiences? Nature journaling is something you can do in a wheelchair. And make that accessible to them. And I think it is such a useful tool for helping us be more present in the world. You can really change somebody else's life by sharing that with them. So if this is meaningful to you, reach out and help bring that to other people. My last little thought is I think I've recently learned just kind of an interesting thing about the idea of kind of generosity in doing this. With my own kids, I gave them their journals, gave them some supplies and things. But this is my daughter Carolyn, and I kind of gave her a set of kid watercolors. Has anybody tried painting with a set of kid watercolors?
Yes.
That's all I have.
Yeah. It's hard. It is really hard. They're made with one primary design feature in mind, that you can eat the entire set of your watercolors and still be happy and healthy. Right? That's the primary objective of those watercolor kits. Because people will eat them. Right? Like, look, my mouth is purple. I'm glad you have a kid watercolor set, right? So I was out, and my little daughter, she was with me. We're on a field trip. She saw me painting with my watercolor kit, and she said, "Daddy, could I use your watercolors?" And I'm thinking, like, you use my watercolor kit, you're gonna mess this whole thing up. You're gonna get green in my yellow, right? And I said, well, let's get your watercolor kit when we get home. That would be really great to do. Like trying to, right? And she said, okay. And there's another nature journaler, Lori Wiggum, who was out with us, and she saw this, and a little bit later, Carolyn was doing her thing, And she got her kit, and she opened it up, and she said, "Do you want to try?" And gave her her own brush, her own little watercolor kit, and she sat there, and she just did all this wonderful stuff that she couldn't have done with her own little edible kit, right? She's no longer a paint eater, by the way, right? She wasn't at this point. So it wasn't about her safety. I was more concerned about my gear. Right? You're not gonna mess with my gear. No. Right? And so I saw this, and I thought it was just this beautiful moment where somebody else had helped my child take the next step. And I would like to say that I had this revelation at that point, right? And that changed my behavior, right? But we went back home, right? And it's like, I got her slightly updated kid set, right? And, you know, I wouldn't use it, right? So then, a year or so later, we're out on another Nature Journal Club field trip, and she comes along, and now you can see she's a little bit older, now big 6-year-old, and we were out in the San Francisco Botanical Garden, and we're painting, and she you know, she had her own set, and it wasn't inspiring her. This is Jen Fox, who's another member of the Nature Journaling Club. And what she did is she said, "Oh, would you like to try it?" She opened up her own kit again, and just like Lori had done, just sort of gave her the room, and she was careful. She didn't mess up Jen's yellows, right? And she was just so into it. And sometimes having the right tool, you know, it really kind of helps make that. So now I'm thinking about my own willingness to share, right? And you know, it was just this beautiful experience, and also a real connection between those two, right? And that can also be kind of part of your scene. Now, sometimes you don't want people who are going to eat your paint, eating your paint, and you know, it's nice not to have somebody mess up your yellow, but also just kind of consider sometimes a little bit of generosity like this at the right time really does help you be able to kind of help others connect with this. One last sort of thought around the same thing. Are any of you in the Nature Journal Club, do you know Mark Simmons? Right, so Mark Simmons is another nature journaler. He also he's a graphic artist. He writes comics and cartoons, and also just a lovely, wonderful person. So he does a lot of his stuff just directly in pen, and I was watching him do his thing, and it's really fun to watch him draw. And he was using this pen that kind of, when he'd press harder, would make a wider line, press lighter, it was thinner line, and it was neat. And sometimes when you're watching somebody who's really experienced, you know, that like you'll kind of get wrapped around, like, if I had that pen, I would draw like that. So it's like, wow, Mark, that's a really neat pen. And he said, well, I thank you. He said, yeah, see, it does this. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Where can I get one of those? And he turns and he gives me the pen. Right? This is the pen he's using. He said, well, here you go. Why don't you take it? I'm like, oh, really? So now I have my mark pen. So now I'm doing all my own drawings with my mark pen, right? And my other daughter, Amelia, sees me draw. And she goes, oh, wow. That's a cool pen. And like, this is like that's the moment. Like, could I have done it like in my like parenting dream? I would have turned to her and said, like, would you like it? No. But, yeah, no, but no, I like, yeah, sure is. Would you like to use this one? Right? All right, but check this out, because then, about a year later, we're on another field trip, and I'm there, Amelia's there, and Mark's there, and he's drawing with a new pen, same kind of pen, right? And she walks over to it, and she's watching him draw, and she says, "Wow, oh, you've got one of those pens." She says, "That's a cool pen." And what does he do? He says, yeah, I really, really like these. They make it easier to do these sort of different kind of lines and these sort of things. Do you want it? And he gave my daughter the mark pen. She now calls these, so she named them the mark pen, right? It's not a marker, the mark pen. So it's not a jack pen, it's not a daddy pen, that's a mark pen. Because he had just it was just this sort of wonderful kind of moment of generosity. And it just sort of made me think about just sort of the idea of generosity and journaling and sharing what you know, sharing the tricks that you know, sharing that with other people whose lives could be sharing your toys, right? Like Jen did, like Lori did, like Mark did. Yep, so that's why you get your pencils today. I do have, just sort of to kind of close this all out, the other weekend, Amelia and I were out, we were sketching and journaling together. And she said, Daddy, I can't find my mark pen. I think I lost my mark pen. That one pen he gave her, it was so special to her. She just brought it everywhere. She would bring it to school. And you know, things sometimes get lost when they're brought to school. She would bring it back. She's like, it's her mark pen. She lost her mark pen. And this time, fourth time's the charm. I gave her mine, right? But just that we all can be sort of think about our own generosity in our lives. What are the things that will really kind of make a difference to the other person, the right person at the right time? And maybe that comes through in nature journaling. Maybe that can come through another way in our lives. And I just hope that that's another thing that we can bring forward. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
I have one question.
And I have an answer.
Well, you do. The secret sauce, is that being